All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Want to thank everyone for coming out to the April 12th, 2016 Budget Committee meeting. It looks like we have, I believe, 7 members in attendance. If the minutes will reflect that we have Ms. Parker present, Mr. Moore, Mr. Lassiter, I am present, Mr. Morrison is present, and Mr. Dudley is present. 6. Looks like I need to count, so we're 6 members, excuse me. All right, so we're now going to look at the agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda? All right, is there a motion to approve the agenda? Motion by Mr. Dudley. Second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, you all received a set of draft minutes prior to this evening. Does anybody have any changes to the minutes? These are the minutes from our April the 11th meeting. Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Motion by Mr. Dudley. Second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, before we get started, Ms. Parker has graciously got a card for Mr. Beaver and his family, which she's passing around. So if everybody would like to take a look at that and sign it while we're going through some of these things, these preliminary matters. And while we're looking at that, we can just go ahead and kind of recap where we're at. Everyone will recall that we went through the director's key request and nobody made any changes. And so it looks like the current list that we're looking at is $5,786,000 to $263, excuse me. Now, Dr. Perkins, we started going over kind of looking at what our starting point was, what do we have available as a possible cushion in order to fund some of those things. And what we went over is that there's around $600,000 that we're currently looking at. Now, that $600,000 is with an assumption that the committee ultimately approves some of those revenue increases that you have, and so that's still that's an assumption. So in some ways, we have to put an asterisk beside that $600,000 that's potentially available. So now the committee, we're at the stage where we're going to have to kind of figure this out. We got the director is saying that he needs approximately $5.7 million to move forward to do some improvement on the things that we've identified as our keys. And Dr. Perkins, on the other hand, is telling us that even with some of these revenue increases, we may only have about $600,000. So we've got some issues to try to work through. So what we're going to do now is get in some discussion as to what does the committee ultimately want to recommend to the board to approve. And as far as figuring this out, I mean, we've got some options. We can either cut some of the director's key requests. We could increase some of the revenue that we're potentially going to approve, or we might do a combination of the two. We may cut some of the director's key request, and we may increase some of the revenue, so to try to make that balance. So to get us started, I am going to kind of go through some possible scenario for us to take a look at, and we'll open the floor for discussion so we can hopefully work our way through that and hopefully come to some consensus possibly. As we were here last night, you all will recall that what my original hope is that maybe Dr. Perkins could find about with that revenue projection, would be able to find about $1.5 million that we could spend towards some of the director's reoccurring expenditure requests. So I was thinking that maybe $1.5 million might be available towards some of those reoccurring expenses, and I was thinking that we could add to that from fund balance, maybe about $1.5 million from our fund balance for some of the one-time expenditures. That would get us up to about $3 million. And then that would leave still a little over $2 million of the director's request that we may do a wait-and-see approach. We don't know what exactly the state is going to fund. They may provide some extra funding. Maybe we can go back and look at that list again, or maybe some of those things, this is the first year, maybe we look at some of these things again in the next budget year. But unfortunately, Dr. Perkins broke my heart a little bit, so that's not our starting point. But that scenario, that kind of 1.5 million for reoccurring, 1.5 for one-time expenditures, and then a wait-and-see approach on the rest of the request, that may still be doable. And so what I'm going to do is go over a scenario with you all, and it's just a starting point for discussion. You all may like it, you may throw it out and come up with your own scenarios, but again, it's just to hopefully move us along where we can start the discussion as to what are some possible scenarios. And again, you may come up with your own scenario. So what we're going to do is, Dr. Perkins, if you can pull back up your worksheet so we can take a look at that. If you go back to your bottom line, so to speak.
Are you talking about this one?
Yes. Well, no, I think you're looking at maybe the fund balance. This is going to be a little bit further up on the revenue part. So right there, under this first scenario that you went over with us, Dr. Perkins, it was only going to leave us about $600,000 to potentially fund some of these key requests. So what I want you to do is go back up to the revenue section. All right, so the total revenue that this draft budget that you have, the total revenue is about $87.5 million. Does everybody see that particular line under the 2016-17 budget? Okay. All right, so we're going to go back up to the local revenue, and Dr. Perkins, the number you currently have is the $35.1 million. Okay. Now, you've also, though, beside that column, we see, and again, this 2016-17, this is what you're trying to predict in the future, starting July 1 for 16-17. But I want to back up a little bit, and I want to look beside column J. We're going to look at column I, excuse me, and that's the column where you've done some estimates for this fiscal year, for 15-16. And one of the estimates that you have for local revenue for this current fiscal year is the $36,052,562. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, just to kind of go through a scenario and kind of walk this through with me, is to budget that, use that as the budget number for 16-17. All right, so if we went with a budgeted revenue of what you are estimating that is actually going to come in, and again, this is the budget revenue for next fiscal year based upon what we're expecting for this fiscal year, okay? So if you make that change, if you go down to the bottom, let's look and see what that may provide to us in available funding. All right, so that would actually get us to about the $1.5 million that I discussed previously, okay? Now, the question, of course, we all have to ask is, Dr. Perkins, how good are your estimates? Are those reliable estimates? Because we don't want to go out on a limb and potentially budget for 16-17 based upon your current fiscal year estimates if we're not comfortable with that. So that's one thing that we have to kind of look at. And so to kind of to see how good that number is, what I first want you to do is look at our historical data. And I think the board may recall that, or excuse me, the committee may recall from our January committee meeting, Dr. Perkins actually had went over a lot of historical information with us previously, and she actually pulled the actual revenues that we've received over the last 10 years. And Dr. Perkins, if you could pull that back up so we could take a look at that. Now, I don't know if we're able to get this on the screens for everybody. I don't know. I don't think we currently have that connected, but hopefully everybody can see the large screen. Oh, okay. I'm the only one. Okay.
Just this one's off. The rest of us, I think, have it.
That's okay. That's good. I'm good. I'm good. I just wanted to make sure all the other members had access to it.
It's the
All right, so Dr. Perkins, I can see the screen fine. I was just really asking for the other members. So if you can look, we'll look at our local tax actual revenue over the last 10 years, and let's go ahead and get to the more recent years. And I think the first thing that we'll notice is for the past 4, actually, years that we're looking at on the board, from 2011 all the way through 2015, we've actually seen growth as far as what our local revenue, and this is actual revenue, this is not budgeted, this is actual revenue, that we've seen growth of at least 3 to 4% every year. So the last numbers that we have for a full year is actually 2014-15. And again, you're trying to do some estimates for 15-16. We're only about 9 months through. But just using that historical data, and again, if we look, actually the last prior 2 fiscal years was actually 4% growth, even if we went with just a 3% growth. From 14-15, that number you'll see is 35 million. And I looked at if we just went with 3% growth, and I've got my calculate machine up here. It's getting serious, so anybody wants to use it, they can check my math. But if we went with a 3% growth factor, that would put us at $36,056,000 for 15-16, just using historical growth, okay? And what the number that you've estimated is actually less a little bit. It's not much. You're 35,052,000, so you're a little bit less than even the 3% growth factor. So that's one thing. It looks like there's it looks like there's a lot of data to support us estimating our 15-16 revenue of the number that you've used, Dr. Perkins. Another thing that, of course, is always concerning, especially with our funding body, is if they ever commit to fund what the actual revenue is, and they may be fine with that, but their concern is always, but what if next year I don't bring in as much revenue as I did the year before? I lock myself into that. And so that's one of their primary concerns. So I went back and I looked at the historical data to try to see, well, has our actual revenue ever decreased? And I had to go back all the way to, and you can scroll back. So we see the last 2 years there's 4% growth, and then 3%, 4%. You actually have to go all the way back to the 2007-8 timeframe. The revenue did take a dip, and I think everybody recalls the recession, and this is when Wall Street thought that we may actually head back into another depression. It was one of the worst financial disasters of all time. And actually, the actual revenue did dip by 2% during that year. But everyone will see that the revenue came right back up the very next year in 2008 to 9, actually above the level that it was prior to that year before. So that was a very one of the worst times that I think of recent memory. That was a 1-year dip of around 2%, and it rebounded pretty rapidly. So that's looking at the historical data as far as us trying to make these predictions. Another thing that to kind of get a little bit more in the specifics, Dr. Perkins, I had asked you to give us a breakdown of the local revenue that you had in this in your estimates, and if you want to pull that up. All right, so we saw the big number that Dr. Perkins had as far as the 15-16 estimate, and here we can see actually a breakdown of her estimates in category. And so one of her estimates we'll see in column I is the property tax. And so if you can scroll back over to column I. All right, so what you're estimating for 15-16 for property tax revenue, you're estimating about $21.4 million for this fiscal year. And again, we're about 9 months into this fiscal year. And I went back and I looked at some of the information. You've got some updated information as far as what our tax receipts are through February.
Yes.
And we're actually already almost at that estimate. Now, of course, we're going to get the bulk of that through February. That's so that in some ways that does make sense. But I think looking at some of the information you provided, Dr. Perkins, through March, you've already got in receipts of $20,589,000. Excuse me. You actually already have in receipts of $21,098,000. And this is through March. And you've actually looked at your data from last year of what you generally get. It's not as much, but for April, May, and June, approximately how much did we get last year in property taxes?
Approximately $500,000 for those 3 months.
Okay. All right, and so if that trend holds true, your estimate may be actually under what you have the 21,430. So you may be actually a little bit lower than what actually comes in. But I understand wanting to be conservative. So again, it looks like, Dr. Perkins, as far as your estimate there, it looks like you've got some pretty good data to back that up. That's an actual good forecast of our data for this fiscal year. So let's also take a look at sales tax. If you the same column I, what you're estimating for sales tax is, for this fiscal year, is a little over $13 million. Does everybody see that figure, I guess? All right, so that $13 million figure, Dr. Perkins, you've recently sent us, or you sent me and I forwarded on to everybody else, the sales tax revenue that we received through March of this year, and maybe you can pull that up real quick. All right, so Dr. Perkins, looking at your column C, through March, you're showing that we've already received $10,397,000. Hope everybody can see that information. Now, if you compare that with what we received, and you have to go up a little bit more, but through March of last year, we'd actually received about $9.2 million. So comparing this time, March of this year with March of last year, we're already over $1 million more than we did a year ago.
Yes.
Okay? So if you scroll down, you actually, I think, have the number that we had received for all of last fiscal year. So for 14-15, we can see in column B, the actual sales tax revenue that we received for 14-15 was $12.5 million. Again, we already have $1 million more than we did last year. If we just assumed that there's sales tax then goes stagnant, we don't have any more increases for the rest of the year, and we just still have that $1 million extra through March, that actually puts us up to $13.5 million for fiscal year 15-16. And again, going back to your information, Dr. Perkins, you're only estimating $13 million.
Yeah.
So I would argue, Dr. Perkins, I mean, just me looking at the data, and I'm a layperson, so you all can discount everything I say, but it almost appears that your estimate is probably under even on that number, okay? But again, for this scenario, what we're talking about is using your conservative figures where you're conservatively estimating that this fiscal year that we're going to bring in about 36 million in actual revenue under local revenue. And again, we know that there's a growth factor. So under this scenario that I'm talking about budgeting for next fiscal year using the estimate for this year, not even taking into consideration any growth factor. And really, if you really want to get economics, if we really wanted to try to be accurate as to what our expected revenue will be for 16-17, we would actually probably take into account a growth factor. But to be on the conservative side, even if we don't take into any consideration of a growth factor, and for 16-17, the economy just goes stagnant. It does not, it doesn't improve. It just stays stagnant, which again, historically, there's not much data to support that. But even if we assume that the economy goes stagnant, that seems to be a pretty reliable number. So let me go back, Dr. Birkins, going back to the scenario A that we've been talking about. And if you'll scroll up, back up, just to kind of recap. Again, under what I'm suggesting as a scenario A is to budget for this coming year, for 16-17, of simply budgeting what you have conservatively estimated for this fiscal year, not taking into account any growth factor, of just assuming that the economy stays stagnant, and that using that number, if we scroll down, well, let me ask you, Dr. Birkins, are you comfortable, because it's ultimately you're the one that's kind of going out on a limb if we rely upon your estimates, are you, from your professional standpoint, are you comfortable making that, if we use that as a budget number, using your estimate for this fiscal year?
Yes, I'm very comfortable, especially after I talked to Teresa today, and she told me what they thought our new amount was going to be. It will be higher than last year, so that really made me feel like I was very close.
Okay, so what you're talking about, somebody with the county budget office has actually told you what the county growth factor that they're probably going to be using for their own assumptions as to what local revenue may be, or
Yes.
at least from a property tax standpoint. And it's actually consistent with what some of your own predictions are.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so again, but under that scenario, so Dr. Birkins, if you're comfortable with using that as a budget number, that would, if you drop down, that would actually, using all the expenses that we have to use regardless if we don't fund any of the director's keys, if we use that revenue figure, that would give us available almost $1.5 million to spend towards the director's key requests. Is that correct? Okay. And again, under the scenario that I'm talking about, under scenario A, it would be, we would use that number to fund that amount of reoccurring budget requests from the director, and then we would drop down and we would look at our fund balance to possibly take out an additional 1.5 million from fund balance for some of the one-time expenditures under the director's key requests. And I think that, so Dr. Birkins, as far as what would be available for the 16-17 budget year to use from fund balance, your estimate is that at the start of the 16-17 school year, we would have about 6.2 million in fund balance?
Yes.
But then we would have that ending fund balance. I guess some of that depends upon whether we vote a balanced budget or not, right? So if we left some surplus in revenue from this budget standpoint, that would increase that fund balance. But if we don't, that number may not change if we do a balanced budget. So it may be just the 6.2 million.
Correct.
Okay. I think I understand it correctly. I'm still learning. But anyway, you believe that you've done a 3% test, and you believe we have approximately, in the 16-17 fiscal year, would have approximately $5 million
Yes.
available to use towards one-time expenditures out of fund balance.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so again, that is just a scenario that to kind of start the discussion. What I'm going to do now is open the floor for some general discussion. What I'm hoping is out of this discussion that the committee can develop a consensus. But at some point, once we get done with that discussion, then we will start taking up motions in order to start finalizing a budget to recommend to the full board. Okay? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for discussion. Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. It's beyond me, knowing that we're going to get increases from BEP, that we wouldn't put that in this budget and budget that too. We know that if it comes, as we discussed, with Governor Haslam's directions that it be used for salaries, we have a place for that. We got a column for salaries. So why have you chosen not to include that in the budget?
We've received information from the state that says do not count on this money yet. You are supposed to be receiving $3.5 million, but don't budget it, don't count on it, don't do anything until it's finalized that you will be getting it.
So Dr. Marzak, why would they dangle a carrot out there and say, oh, no, you can't have that?
It's the government.
I mean, it may not be 3.5, but do you think that it's going to be 1.5?
I have no earthly idea how much it's going to be.
So do we have any idea of how much the BEP has increased over the years that we can add to, perhaps use for planning?
This is a little bit different because this is a stimulus increase. This is, historically, the state has underfunded BEP. They've never fully funded BEP to 100%. They funded about the mid-60s. So this is because the state has actually ended up in the black. The legislators have said, let's throw some of that black money to the school systems and let's fund BEP a little bit more. So that's why this is a straight stimulus to take it from like 64 to like 66%. So we've got teacher salaries, we've got funding the 12th month of insurance, we have some other things like that, and at the end it's technology. So we've got about 3 or 4 things, but the directors of schools have received information from the state. Do not count on this money yet.
Okay, well, let's discount that money then.
Okay.
Dr. Berkins, do we have data that shows how much BEP has increased year over year for the last 10 years?
If I go back to look at the historical information, I only did it as a separate category for federal and state government. Are you okay with looking at that?
However we do it is fine. I'm not worried about the process so much as the product. And that's weird for me to say because I'm always a process guy. But we know that we're going to get extra money, yet we're not putting that in our budget. And we have the means to look back and see what we should be getting from BEP. So I guess I'm just concerned that we're not anticipating any change there. And I have to say that, we're looking at going into our fund balance for these things. And I certainly wouldn't vote for going to our fund balance to begin with. If we need funding, we have a funding body. We should ask them to fund those things. If we didn't have our fund balance, we wouldn't have bought buses just a few weeks ago. If we didn't have our fund balance, we wouldn't have done the maintenance things that we've done the last 3 years to the tune of about $12 million, including the train projects. And speaking of train, we wouldn't be able to fill in the holes that we found in the train issues if we didn't have our fund balance. And I really believe that we're undervaluing how valuable a healthy fund balance is. And if we take that away, we're going back to our funding body for everything that we need. Again, I just am concerned that we're thinking that our fund balance is just there for us to use, and it is, but I think that we need to conserve it as much as we can. If we're going to ask our funding body to fund us, let's ask them to fund us. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I guess, I share your sentiment that we do want to get more information from the state. But the scenario that what I'm discussing is that additional state funding may be the round two, that we go back and look at the director's key requests. Because of the scenario that I'm discussing funding the reoccurring expenditures of $1.5 million. And even if we take $1.5 million out of fund balance, that still leaves about over $2 million, probably about $2.5 million of the director's key requests that would not be funded. Now, it may be the committee ultimately decides that, hey, I want to try to even fund all that as well. But that's not funding all the requests that we as a committee, we spent over 3 days reviewing. And we all had an opportunity to go through that key request and to say, hey, some of those things are just not necessary. Some of those things are not needed. Some of those things are not furthering the keys. But I think we as a committee, we reviewed all that information, and I think we as a committee have made a determination that these are some needs in our school. That apparently third grade math and third grade reading maybe is not where we want it to be, and that we want to try to push those things further. So we have to make it a determination, regardless of where the funds come from, what are we as a board going, or as a committee, what are we going to do to try to address some of those things? Now, I do want to look at some of the historical data on the state. Dr. Perkins, if you could pull up the last 10 years.
I've got a really quick update. So the bill that we're talking about is Senate Bill 2565 and House Bill 2574. The last communication we received was Commissioner Queen back on February the 11th, and she said, please note that these are estimates only and are based on a 1% enrollment increase as well as current fiscal capacity determinations. So I went to the legislative floor, and I noticed that on April the 8th, that it was placed on the Senate regular education calendar for April the 13th, and then it is received from the House, passed on first consideration. So Senate Bill 2565 and 2574 is still being voted on. So we don't even have determinations yet because it's still moving through the House and the Senate. So that's why she's saying don't do anything, because we don't know what's going to happen.
And so, thank you, Dr. Marzak. Dr. Perkins, if you could pull up the 10-year revenue, because I think Mr. Morrison was asking about some of what information we do have. So if you could
Right,
pull
this
that up.
This is the 10-year revenue.
Oh, you've got it. Okay. All right. So if we actually look from a historical standpoint, remember, from a local revenue standpoint, I had trouble. I couldn't go back and I couldn't really read the tea leaves where local revenue is dipping other than in that one recession year. But actually, we only have to go back to the 14-15 fiscal year. And according to this data, we actually had a 1% drop in BEP or state funding. Went from 51,750 down to 51,480. And then we can go back a little bit further, Dr. Perkins. And I think we had one year, 2009, again, much more recent than more recent than the recession year. BEP funding was basically stagnant from 2009-10 fiscal year to 2010-11 fiscal year. So I don't know if we can count our chickens before they hatch. That's the one thing with the state funding. And I wish I had all that information. I do, and I've been asking Dr. Perkins and Dr. Marzak for that information on a pretty regular basis, and I've been getting the same responses that we just don't have that yet. We have some indications there may be some extra funding, and I think if we get that, it's great news. That frees us up to potentially do some more things to potentially address some of these other critical needs. But I want to remind everybody, talking about the local funding and what are we going to do, I do recall last budget year that there were a number of these RTI things that we're looking at right now that we were asked to fund. And I don't think, if my recollection may serve me wrong, but I do not recall us funding any of those things. And so what did that do? Did we accomplish anything in those particular fields with reading and those other things? We didn't. And so now's our opportunity to address some of those things. The director is coming to us, telling us, this is what I need to do to start addressing some of those things. So, all right, so now we'll turn it over to Mr. Dudley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So far, we've gone through the keys items and what Dr. Marzak's requests are there, and then we've been asked to cut or remove and whatever to that list, but I'm not prepared to make any recommendations on the keys side until I see what's on the back side of that piece of paper. We haven't looked at the GP budget at all to see how all this intertwines together. And so, you know, I feel like we need to address some of the GP side before we can really look at the total picture and see how all this intertwines. So I think Dr. Perkins has done a good job of showing us, explaining the revenue side, but I think we still have a lot on the expense side, and then a lot of unknowns with the GP budget side of it.
Mr. Lassiter.
And similar to Mr. Dudley's comment, actually this board and the staff has done such a good job over the past year of doing things like recommending and approving, excuse me, our facilities assessments and things. Typically, I'm going to say pretty much since Mr. Dudley and I have been on the board, when it comes to doing budget time, it would be, our capital budget would be things like fund Central High School, we need some buses, we need some money for maintenance, and maybe one other item. That was pretty much it. And you knew Central High School wasn't going to make the list, so it was pretty cut and dry. This time, though, we have some excellent data that says we need to do some things to our buildings. We need to do things that we never even knew before that we needed to do. So like Mr. Dudley, not only do I want to see part of the other, the changes that we're going to make, because I know there's been some things that you guys have also cut from the GP budget, but also before I say, well, yeah, let's spend this, I want to know what some of our suggestions and plans are for capital improvements, how much we're going to take out of fund balance as far as the plan. I know that's up to us, but what's the plan for our improvements? What's the plan for our corrections to the facilities and different things like that? Because that may change how much I want to put towards the keys, if like Mr. Morrison said, if any, or what I want to do on that end. So that's where I'm going to have a hard time saying, yeah, let's just take some money out of here, when I'm not sure yet what the plan is for that chunk of money.
Well, I think as everyone knows, next week we're going to take up those capital requests. So we'll be going through, Mr. Moore on Thursday is going to be looking at what our 5-year capital plan is. And then once Mr. Moore gets done with that on Thursday, we'll be taking up on Monday. What is it that the budget committee wants to fund from that, and what the committee wants to ask our funding body to fund. And so at that time, it would be perfectly appropriate for us to make that determination. Okay, if we've got this much in fund balance, do we want to put down a down payment ourselves towards some of these capital needs? Or do we want to ask the funding body for all these needs, or do we want to do a combination of those? But right now, just to try to bring everybody back to what we've been going over the last 2 weeks, is our GP budget. And that's what we're in right now. And the director has brought to us what he's telling us from an academic standpoint, what the needs are to try to move us forward. And so, this will be a two-part, this is really a two-part thing that we have to address. We have to address some of these reoccurring expenses. And that's where, when I was going through the scenario that I laid out, we would be addressing some of those reoccurring expenditures that the director is asking for by looking at some of those revenue streams. So that would be around the 1.5 million. But as far as what we take out of fund balance, that'll be something else for the committee to make a determination. The director has brought us some one-time expenditures on the academic side, and so the committee can make that choice. Do you all want to fund some or not at all? That'll be up to the committee to decide. But again, right now we've got to try to figure this out. So I'm hearing everybody telling me about some of the things that that we've got to tackle this. We've got to figure it out. What the director has asked us for these requests, what does the committee want to do? Are we going to try to figure out how to fund some of these requests, or are we just going to leave things as is?
Question, please.
Mr. Morrison.
Dr. Perkins, in our current fiscal year, what is a penny worth?
I need to look at my notes. Go ahead, Scott.
Like $170,000 or so?
Is that? Yeah, I think this year, and I'll check it for sure, it was 167,400. Do you have it?
And what is the county telling us that the pennies are going to be worth next year?
170,467.
So are they looking at increasing our income by like $400,000? Is that what they're telling you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, is that estimate in the budget? In our estimated revenues?
In the estimate, when we just added to the revenues, yes.
And have we had any increases in insurance rates or benefits or anything like that that we normally look at and have to fund?
We did not have any increase in insurance rates this year in our benefits, in our medical insurances and our dental insurances. But I did budget a 5% increase, taking the chance, so we don't take a chance to get stuck if it increases next year. Our calendar year for insurance, everyone signs up or they start over or can change their policy, I should say, in December. Mm-hmm. So it would get us from December on next year if we don't plan for it this year.
Right. What about our liability and our building insurance and things like that?
Can you answer that, Stan? Stan, can you answer that? Our insurance, our building insurance, and
I'm sorry, I was trying to calculate the pennies. Would you ask that question again,
I was
please?
just asking about our insurance coverage for liability and property.
We actually just put that out for bids. We've reached the end of the 3-year period. 3 years ago, we bid that, so we really won't know till we get the bids back. We plugged in a 5% factor into our budget, but we really won't know until we get the bids back. We will have those in May. But we do have it out for bids. Hopefully bidding it will make it, maybe we'll save some money, but it is out for bids right now.
And Dr. Marzak, other than the letter about the 3.5 million from Commissioner McQueen, have we gotten our first BEP letter yet? And when do we anticipate getting that?
I was told that they usually come around the middle of April, and we're fast approaching the middle of April. If I don't have it by Friday, I will call our fiscal representative and ask him if he knows when it will be out, so I can give you all some idea of where they stand.
And just, I hope, maybe the last question, if I'm looking at your estimates, then you're estimating that our 2016-2017 budget will reduce by about $900,000, our revenues.
Yes, sir. For our revenues, that they'll,
According to what you've given us, yeah.
decrease from where? I'm trying to
Okay.
see what you're seeing.
Well, I'm still working off the one from last night. And-
Oh, okay.
And in column I, H is 1516 from 88,475 to 87,501. It appears that this is what's on the screen's been updated, apparently.
Yes, it has.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Perkins, I think if you want to scroll down, I think what Mr. Morrison was asking about as far as the expenditures. Mr. Morrison, you can correct me if I'm wrong. All right, so for your 16-17 budget, the number you have, 86.8 million, do you see that under column J? And so what you're budgeting is that we actually need to increase the budget by 791,000. Am I looking at that correctly?
That's an increase in the expenditures
Right.
from the previous
From
budget.
the previous budget year.
Yes.
Correct. Now, Dr. Perkins, it might be helpful for the committee to maybe kind of do a review of what you did to come up with this 16-17, what you believe we need, even if we don't fund any of the key requests. And maybe you can kind of walk us through that process. As my understanding, you went to each department.
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Dr. Marzak brought before us a plan to go to each department. We created a document for every department, every school within our system. We gave them a document that had each line item that pertained to their department or school with an amount on it. The amount on that document was the amount that they spent last year. The goal was to actually put the budget where it's actually spent, not to just have some money in there and then we're moving it around constantly.
2015, 16.
So they were given the money that they had spent the previous year. And they were asked to look this over with their leadership committee, some of their students, to get together as a group and look at these figures and see where they would be, where the numbers would be put to best suit them. Just for example, so say one of the schools had some extra money in office supplies that they really thought, we don't ever use all those office supplies, so we'd like to transfer some of that money into our library fund. And they were given that opportunity. Every school, every department was given the opportunity to change the funds around. That's why you'll see that it's a little bit less, or it looks a little bit less, because we actually gave them the money spent. Now, of course, there's some departments that theirs is going to be higher Because like, for example, Stan, we know that there's a possibility, we know his possibilities that, electricity, cost of electricity, that type of thing may increase. But for the most part, everybody stayed within those numbers that they had actually spent last year. We took all those documents, we brought them together, and we put them into that budget workbook. And then from that budget workbook, we compiled the data into this spreadsheet for y'all to see, just it's all in one place.
And so you did this with every department, even your own department. I see that there's the fiscal service line.
Yes.
And maybe you can scroll down to that so we can look at that.
You mean up, sorry.
Or you may be scrolling up. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. I believe it's this one. Let me make sure that's the right one. Yes.
Yeah. And so you actually, your department, as far as from the previous budget, you've actually decreased the budget for fiscal services
Yes,
by $48,000. So
Yes.
your department has taken a cut.
yes.
And I see that there's a number of other departments that are actually, they've made some cuts.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we found when, for me, I know for my purposes, when I looked at the budget, for one, I was a different type of employee before I sat where I'm sitting now, and that position was not refilled. We determined that it was not, that we were going to spread it out amongst the employees that we had. And that was before the budget process came up. That was a decision that was made way before that. So we had a whole salary that we were saving. Another area I remember that was health services. There was, in their budget, included 2 salaries for the director and 2 salaries for the secretary. So that was one of the places that we found a little bit as well, that we could, put in a better place.
Right. Well, what I'm hearing from some of the committee members, they may want to ask more questions about this existing GP expenditure budget. And so let's go through that so that we make sure that if any committee members have questions, they can ask you those questions. Now, we'll start at the top of what you're budgeting for 71,100, which is one of our largest budgetary items because that's teacher salaries and teacher benefits. Correct. Mr. Breeden, I'm sorry.
I was just going to answer a question that Mr. Morrison asked earlier.
Okay.
If you want me to ask that about last year's penny?
Sure, yeah.
I did find that. It's 164,726. It's what a penny was worth last year. And it clarifies in here, of the tax rate, 1.2499 is the number of pennies that was allocated to us. I think that's what's been the number of pennies over the last number of years I've been here. I know that's changed in the past, but it's 1.2499. And last year that was figured at, this comes from our budget notebook last year, $164,726.
And then this year, as you said, 170,467 is the anticipated work.
Is that what it was, 174.67 for this year, number of pennies?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's look at the expenditures of the GP budget, Dr. Perkins. Under the 71,100, what you're budgeting is $43,391,000. So everybody can see that. Now that's actually, if we go over 2 columns in column, I guess it'd be column H. Column H is what our current fiscal year amended budget is, correct?
Correct.
For salaries and for
Correct.
teachers.
Correct.
And so the number that you used is the same number that is our current amended budget.
Yes.
So help me with that, because I have a little trouble following all that. So we started out with the original budget under column G of the 33 million, but we've made amendments throughout the year, and that's actually increased that to 43.3 million.
Yes.
And explain that to me.
The budget amendments? or
Yeah,
the-
well, explain why that's gone up from 43 million to almost $4 million throughout the year.
I I'm not sure that I can tell you all of the budget amendments, but I believe that most of them were for software. Am I right, Scott?
Okay.
If you want to know why I kept it the same,
Yes, yes.
when I first did it, I went and I looked at the salaries. Like I said, I looked at everyone's salary. I made sure they were the right place and account numbers were correct and everything. Then I sorted it out on an Excel spreadsheet, and I divided it up into the different categories. And when I looked at these, we had many changes this year in positions. I was a little leery of reducing it to the point we were at this point. If you remember, I had changed that number from the original number. If you look at your original documents, I increased it some because I was a little leery when I really looked at it. So if we have a vision of making Murray County the place that everyone wants to come to, that they want to send their kids to school at, we've decided that we need to make sure we hire qualified individuals. So I did not want to go down to that $30,000 salary. I wanted to keep it at more of a mid-range salary for a teacher. So that was what made me increase that. When I would look back at these salaries, I just wanted to be sure that I was making sure we had enough to hire those qualified individuals given the opportunity.
And then also, Dr. Marzak, did you say that Ms. Alexander updated us that or Ms. Hartgrove, that we have some schools that do not have enough teachers in order to keep
Yes.
the state mandated? So tell us a little bit about that.
So, for example, over the last couple of years, Spring Hill High School has been losing teachers, and they've actually should have been owed 6 teachers. So we gave them their 6 teachers that they should have had according to state guidelines all along.
And that's in this current GP
Yes,
budget.
and also Whitthorne Middle School, you're supposed to have educational assistants, 1 for every 75 students. And so they're supposed to have 5 EAs, they only have 2. So we gave them their 3 more educational assistants that they were supposed to have years ago. And so we fixed a lot of those things in the budget.
Okay. Mr. Lassner.
While we go through this particular part right here, I know you did your job interview not too long ago.
yeah.
But this should also be a practice budget interview. Because when, I know you've spoken in front of the commission before.
Yes.
But things like this are going to be very important to tell them.
Yes.
that we cannot hold back and we can't sugarcoat the fact that, hey, we should have had these teachers all along. And we need to make them understand that.
And
hey,
Dr. Potts told us, I've been saying, why are we growing in enrollment and losing teachers? But yet she was continuing to be notified at the end of the year, you've lost 2 teachers, you've lost 1 more teacher. And so it was really good for all of us to sit in the room together, because even Dr. Hargrove said, well, I was told take 2 teachers, I took 2 teachers. So when she sat in the room and she looked at the numbers, she was like, this isn't right. And so that's the benefit of this process, is that it's transparent. And they sat and saw it, I sat and saw it, and because principals were allowed to bring people with them, like for example, I think it was Hampshire, that brought 2 people from their leadership team with them, just to show them how transparent the budget process is. And with transparency means you have to make things right. And so that's what we did.
And again, that's, I think that's great that we're doing this, but big hitters in Mr. Morrison and Mr. Dudley will probably agree with this. Some big hitters are going to be number of teachers, how many teachers we have above BEP, number of central office personnel, that kind of thing. So that's good that we have a ready, truthful, no, stuttering and all that. Why do you need this? Well, because over the years, we have lost teachers that legally we shouldn't have been losing, and the schools were short. So, I mean, I applaud you for that, but I just, like I said, as we go through this, this is going to be kind of your practice interview in front of the commission. So.
Yeah.
And they may ask you if you'd fire me, so be careful.
It's okay. It's all right.
And just real quick, and I do certainly, I hope the state sends us a big check and that gives us some more flexibility. But the state is saying that we're going to allocate this to our teachers for raises. That's what they're telling everybody. I don't know how what the requirements are, as far as what strings the state puts on it, whether we have flexibility or not. But I think we have to keep in mind that if that's what the state is saying, and we have counties, surrounding counties that we're in competition with, and they use that funding to increase the salaries of those teachers, and we don't, we put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. And I think in some ways we already have some competitive issues. And so my thought process whenever that state funding comes in, and of course it'll be up to the committee and the board ultimately what to do, but I want us to, as much as possible, to at least remain competitive with our peers from a salary standpoint, because we want to attract the best and the brightest, and we also want to retain the best and the brightest, and we want to stop this headhunting type situation where sometimes our greatest talent gets picked. And so we've got to keep that in mind as well, and that's where I think from the state funding standpoint gives us maybe to keep us on at least strategically on par, and maybe to even move us a little bit even further on that competitiveness.
And there's actually two that I'm looking for. One is that BEP check from the state, and the second is for a rebate from the state for the mechatronics grant. If we get the grant through mechatronics, we're looking for a rebate of personnel, materials annually. So there's actually two things that we're looking for.
And that may free us up some funding to go back to maybe the things we leave on the table as far as your list. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, Mr. Moore.
Just a small point. When we're talking about losing teachers, we may need to clarify that that's not the teachers just left. They were administratively removed from the school, I think is what you're actually saying, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're clear on words when people talk about it. Because losing teachers sounds like maybe they just left.
No, teaching positions were taken from the school, and they were reallocated in other parts of the district.
I just think we probably need to be very clear about that.
Sure.
That was what actually, they didn't just leave and decide to go somewhere else.
Sure.
All right, so Dr. Perkins, let's to address any questions that the committee has under your current GP budget, let's just kind of go down the line of the alternative instruction program. What you're proposing is actually to go down $4,000.
Yes.
Do you know how you came up with that you can actually reduce $4,000 out of the budget from the last year?
Again, it was from just looking at all the numbers, from bringing everybody together, and this is what you spent last year. Are you going to stay within that budget? Do you need to increase? And we just talked, actually as a group, the principals came before us, and they just let us know what they wanted. And when I put those numbers on those documents, remember, I put what they spent, not what was in their budget. So, trying to keep everybody within, I guess I want them to have some accountability so that you're not finding that come April and May, we're just blowing money. We're just going to buy things because it looks like our budget still has money in it.
And dropping down to the next line, you got special education. You're cutting $159,000 from our prior budget.
Yes.
And is that because of the same process of, instead of just
Yes.
relying upon, well, that's what you always got in the past, we actually requested those departments and those folks to tell us, what do you really need?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I did not make these decisions. The group made these decisions. It started with the head of that department, and then they came before the executive committee, and we talked it all through. And these were decisions that were made as a whole.
Yeah. And you got to remember the ones that are coming from the schools were principals and leadership teams working together. So principals and teachers made these decisions.
Okay, Mr. Lassiter.
And one of the things that really bothers me about this particular category and that group having that much less in expenditures than they had budgeted is this is your category that gifted comes out of. So this idea that, and I'm not saying that you all said this,
Right.
the idea that we don't have money to spend on gifted shows me right here that there was money there and it didn't get spent where it should have. And, so again, if we're gonna do things for gifted, then do we go through and cut that much just because? I guess my question would be on all these categories, looking at whether that they had a decrease or an increase, just because they had a decrease or an increase, is that justifiable? You know, in this case, I would say that much of a decrease was not justifiable because we had an underserved population in our county. And obviously, there certainly wasn't a financial excuse for it. And I believe that as we go through, I'm sure there's going to be categories that we're going to be higher than some people would
Yep.
think, oh, that you should be. So I kind of have a problem with us as a group. You know, if you people are, if this board is serious about bumping stuff up, then there's the category right there.
And Dr. Perkins, this may be a good time to maybe explain something. I noticed that there's another category under special education. It's dropping down a little bit, 72,220. What's the difference between those? I noticed that you're increasing the budget under one of those and decreasing on the other. Maybe you can kind of help me with that.
Do you want to answer that, Scott, or do you want me to? The difference, the special ed.
Budget workbook.
What is the other account?
Did you get that?
71, 100.
And then there's a 72,200.
I'm sorry, I can't see the words as I have it up here. Go ahead.
A lot of it has to do with what her categories of service are and which, you know, she has serves different categories of children. So a lot of it has to do with that. So I think it would be better if she would come and explain. We could have her here at the next meeting to talk about those changes in the budget.
So 71,200, the special education program includes activities that provide learning experiences for students having special needs. This includes preschool as well as elementary and secondary students. Services include activities for varying needs. This includes educating the gifted and those with learning, emotional, and physical disabilities. A student is educated based on an individualized education plan developed by a team who addresses the particular needs of the student. What was the other one?
72,230.
72.
220.
72,220. 72,220 includes activities primarily for assisting instructional staff in planning, developing, evaluating the process of providing learning experiences for students with special needs. Activities include curriculum development, techniques of instruction, child development and understanding, and staff training. So these are all listed in the Murray County Public Schools 16-17 budget workbook. And it has the individual where the 2014-15 audit report was, the 15-16 approved budget, and the 16-17 approved budget, as well as talking about increases and decreases for each one of those things that we're talking about.
Well, it's kind of labeled, I mean, the same. I guess I'm just trying to figure out from a program standpoint. I mean, are they addressing similar?
I'm not sure if this
Thanks.
helps. It would help me a little bit. How I understand it is the first account, like for education, and then there's another for education. The first account is the schools, what happens in the schools. The second account, or the account that's further down, is what happens behind the schools. So what's going on in central office or training or thing. And I don't know that I'm exactly positively correct, but that's how someone helped me to understand why we have two accounts that say regular education and why we have two accounts that say special education.
So under 71,200, you have teachers, career ladder, we have homebound teachers, we have educational assistants, speech pathologists, we have longevity pay, other salaries and wages, substitute teachers certified, substitute teachers non-certified, contingency or contracted social agencies, we have maintenance and repair of equipment, other contracted services, instructional supplies, other charges, and then special education equipment. In 72,220, you have the salary of the supervisor and the director, career ladder again, because we still have people with career ladder. We have psychological personnel, so the money we pay for psychologists, money for assessment, secretaries, clerical personnel, Longevity again. We have communication, postage, travel, other supplies and materials, staff development, other equipment. So those are the breakup of the two things. In one, we've got teachers, assistants, materials. In the others, we have director, office staff, postage, travel, and things like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was just kind of making a couple notes. Okay. I just need y'all to help me understand this. So y'all all sat down with every principal and every department. So in this case, we're talking about Lisa Ventura, correct? When it comes to these special ed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it popped, if I'm understanding correctly, it was identified that there was $159,000 budgeted in this 71200 over what she had used, right?
Not necessarily that it was budgeted over what, you mean the budget was more than what she used, yes?
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so, and then there's another category that kind of falls under her where, if I'm understanding correctly, this 56,000, yes?
Teachers, schools, department, and overall running of the department. That's the best way to look at it.
Okay. Well, before Mr. Lassiter, even wanted to speak, it was kind of like, hold on, that makes no sense to me. I mean, I guess I'm curious if from the good housekeeping side of
There you go.
this, did that ever trigger why is this so much? I mean, we're griping about,
I got it. I have data to show you why. Because while it accumulates and it adds up, it's little things from here and there that add up. Like, for example, changes in salary. So we talked about attrition. So when somebody leaves and somebody comes in and they may have less experience, we pay them less. So those little things have added up to this big thing. So here, let me snag this for a second. I guess it would be easier to show you than it would be to sit here and explain.
okay, well,
Verbally.
while you're setting that up, I mean, at Christmas time when I knew a gifted teacher was leaving, I mean, I had what I feel like was a very meaningful discussion to me with Lisa about, that REACH is very, and I thought I was being kind by saying underserved. And Lisa laughed, and she was basically, yeah, it's not served at all. So, I mean, this is on her radar. So you're telling me she had this kind of money? And when I'm verbalizing this, and she is acknowledging to me that there is nothing tending to this, nothing has changed. I am a little bit speechless that this was on her radar.
So,
And there's $159,000?
well, so the difference in teachers for salaries is a reduction. So we'll be paying about 100,000 less next year for the teachers we have than we paid this year. So there's a difference in salaries of 100,000. Career ladder increases. Homebound teachers is about 1,000 more. There's an 8,000 reduction in educational assistants just because of the difference in the salaries, not because we have less, just because there's a difference in the salaries. In speech pathologists, there's a difference in salaries of about 2,000. With longevity pay, because we had some change in positions, there'll be a difference of 6,250 less. Other salaries and wages, there's about a difference of about $35,000. Substitute teachers is the same. Substitute teacher certified is the same. The contingency agencies, basically how much we've been budgeting to how much we've been spending, should have been about $2,400 less. Service and equipment is the same. Contracted service is the same. Supplies and materials same. And all of the other educational equipment, everything has pretty much remained the same because we've pretty much spent what we've budgeted. So really the big difference is of the salaries here is the difference between this year and last year. So that's the 71,200.
I'm glad you're giving me all this information. It gives me a much greater understanding, and I
Yeah.
am seeking that. But it still illuminates that I had a conversation with her, and she acknowledged a need.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if she is in a supervisory role, she should be aware of her budget. And there was money there. And I think she is a tremendous advocate for children with special needs that put them on the lower end of the continuum. She is a
Okay.
tremendous advocate. But if our statement is to educate all children for life, I'm talking about maximizing potential. And I don't feel like that discussion got any response.
Okay.
And I think it was a very valid discussion. And now that if she's in a supervisor role and can manage her budget, why did she not do something with this? So I think you just mentioned that maybe she could come and speak to us, but I would just love to, likely there's a very good answer, but I would really like to be told. And I hope that these are notes that we're filing away, as we talked about, so that next year it can be different.
Ms. Harris, I don't know that I can speak totally about this, but I'm going to do my best. From what I can tell, in my position where I'm at now, people did not have a conversation about their budgets. They didn't know, I don't think, much about what their budgets were, especially in the salary ranges. And I'm actually the one who prepared the salary portion of these budgets. They were not given that portion. I'm not sure why I did it that way. I just thought it would be simpler for me to go through all the records. So I'm not so sure that Ms. Ventura knew that she had those extra salary lines. I'm not so sure before me what they saw. Now, since I've been there, I have been giving them financial statements, like just the last couple of months. I've been giving them their financial statements so they can look at them. And I was told by a few people that they had never seen them before. So just in her defense, I'm not sure that she knew that these monies were available to her to spend.
I appreciate that, and I can believe all of that. And, I think this whole new budget process is very eye-opening and illuminating to a lot of people. I'm getting that from principals. I think it's very empowering to people. So, just looking forward, I hope that we can use this to govern our decisions and put more towards gifted in the future.
I think that's a good comment, Ms. Powers. I think probably going forward, this has been a learning process for everybody, and some of this information is power. And so hopefully, this is the first year. I think we all have to keep that in mind. I think we've all had discussions of things that maybe have not been addressed the way that there should have been in the past. But I think going through this process, the first time it's not going to be perfect. But I think next year, it's just like we had a lot of schools that didn't submit requests that probably they should have. But I think it was a new process, and they just didn't really realize that. I'm pretty sure next year, we needed to brace ourselves, so because I think there's going to be a little bit of a bandwagon type, situation, which is maybe a good thing. Maybe when people start realizing that, well, hey, if I can put together a good plan and I can make that presentation to the director and I can make that presentation to Dr. Perkins, I might get some extra funding. But I think what we've done is turn the process completely around. I think in the past it was more, we tried to address things by just throwing money at it. But if people didn't have that plan to begin with, it didn't really matter how much money you threw at it. So it's kind of reversed the process where now people need to kind of put the thought process in first of, okay, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? What's my plan? And then what do I need? What kind of resources do I need to try to accomplish that? And so that's where, again, I think going forward, I think it's going to be a much better situation. So some of this is us bringing up to the surface things where we're realizing maybe there were some blind spots. Maybe we weren't realizing that we were addressing that. But just this entire process right now is in some ways accomplishing some things because it's kind of making everybody start thinking, and now we start realizing these blind spots. So I think it's going to be a better process going forward. Ms. Parker and then Mr. Laster.
Dr. Perkins, your explanation as far as the difference between the two sections of special education made perfect sense. I guess my only question would be, from the discussion that y'all had, if we know that the underserved that we've talked about is the gifted program in the schools, why are we decreasing the schools portion, let's say, and increasing the central office portion instead?
I don't think when the budgets were done, I mean, that was not something I was aware of. And as I said, I did the salary portion of the budgets. No one was given that portion. I looked at what salaries they had in their schools at the time or in their departments at the time, and I did those calculations. Each department was not given that piece of the budget. So I don't know that they were aware.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is like I think it was like 56,000 that was going to be added into the 72,220. Why are we not funneling that back into the schools as opposed to funneling it into
We would
central
have to
office?
look at that. We would
Right.
have to look at that line
Okay.
in the workbook to see
Okay.
what the changes were for.
And Dr. Perkins, I don't know if this is the case or not, but we just hired a mental health supervisor. Would that be under that line, or is that under a different line altogether?
Yeah, the supervisor of counseling and mental health, where would that would go under court.
No, yeah, that would go under a different line.
Okay, never mind. Mr. Lassner.
And when I started this discussion, it wasn't about, last year and whatnot, because I agree, there's a lot of information that schools and people never had. My part of this discussion is when the group went through and then calculated and said, oh, look, we've got 160,000 extra dollars. That's when I'm sad that it didn't pop up with everyone and say, hey, we've got, special ed's got 160,000 they didn't spend. Where are our holes in our program? And I guess that my thought on that is, it's not too late to change this. And I can tell you from experience, all right, I know we have a different director. I understand that. I can tell you from experience, 13 and a half years my son was in Murray County Public Schools. 11 and a half years before there was a change to a major change to the gifted program, and that was to get one more teacher. And that was a long, hard fight. You let this go now, you may not see what you want to see until your kids are out of school. I mean, this is the time, if we're here to talk about the budget, and we're here to talk about what we, along with, the staff wants to see, if this is something that you as a group want, then we need to say, hey, we're going to take some of this money and reallocate it.
And remember that offsets some of the costs that the board shares, so that means taking it out of the yellow and putting it into the orange. Or reduce that $1.4 million by however much you spend on personnel at this point.
All right, I'm sure I'm going to get kicked at some point, going back to process.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little bit at a retreat, seems like years ago.
October, yeah.
But, I guess I look at what our role is as a board. At the end of the day, I do not know what is the best way to address some of these things. I think it's good that we can bring these things up that, hey, our attention needs to be drawn to that. Mr. Director, you need to go and maybe look at that. I mean, there's some concerns, look into it. What do we need to do to address that? But I am just not capable of making those determinations of what is the most effective ways to use these funds to accomplish the things that the director as a professional is telling us, this is what I need to move us forward. And so for me, it's kind of a question between, we hate using that term, but micromanaging versus trusting our professionals. And maybe I think in years past, maybe there was a warranted maybe concern of necessarily having that trust level. But to me, this is a new day, and I want us to be able to trust our professionals under all these things. I think we have these concerns about the spending, but I was not there with Dr. Perkins when she met with all the department heads. I'm not there with the director as he's meeting with these supervisors. I'm not there in the schools talking with the teachers and talking with the principals. So for myself, I may see from the outside looking in, I may see some things where I don't know if that's the way I'd do it, or I think I'd do it a different way. And I think we're all, that's human nature. That's what we do, okay? And we're all very smart and intelligent people, and I think we probably all have very good ideas. But because we're not in the trenches, so to speak, in the day-to-day, in some ways, from a process standpoint, I think we have to rely upon our professionals to be able to come forward to us and tell us, this is where, I think from a district standpoint, from a budgeting standpoint, this is where I believe that we can reallocate some of our funding to free up of addressing some of the other fiscal needs. And I think we've had that happen throughout the year. I think Dr. Birkins and Dr. Marzak have come to us on several occasions with budget amendments of using existing budgets and freeing up those funds and doing something else to maybe further these keys and further the county. And so I would like for us to, my list, if my to-do list, if y'all want me to get out my to-do list, it's probably a mile long. And I could tell you all things, 99 things that I think right now we probably ought to be doing, okay? But I want to kind of like hold back from that myself personally and kind of let's see the process work through. Let's see if we can get the right model going forward where we hire the right people and we can rely upon them, us part-timers who do not have the time to be able to invest to kind of get to know the ins and outs of things, that we can actually rely upon our professionals to come to us and say, this is what I need, this is what I don't need, and to, in large part, trust that judgment. So that's where I would like for us to, from a process standpoint, kind of handle things going forward. And let's see how that process works. And if that process doesn't work, then, Mr. Director, you're going to have an evaluation coming up in June, and you're going to have an evaluation coming up the next year. And I think you're going to hear from us that, hey, we trusted you to move us forward. We gave you that leeway. We gave you that judgment and discretion. But, hey, this is where we, really want to emphasize. All right, so Mr. Moore.
I guess we went over some of this last night. Director, my only question would be I think it's clear that the gifted, I don't know if I even want to call it a program at this point, but addressing gifted issues in this county has not really been at the forethought or even much of an afterthought. Can I have your assurances that next year it will be a cohesive plan that's tied in with the rest of the things you're looking for?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. That meets what I'm looking for, I'll be honest. And to go with what Mr. Bates is saying, although I would love to start playing with this, I understand we're late in the game, so to speak, for asking you to put together a cohesive, gifted program in the next 3 days or something. That's probably not realistic. But again, if you're telling me that as of next year that this will be addressed, and just because it's coming out this year that we'll make whatever necessary adjustments to address this appropriately, I'm satisfied by that.
We can look at it, definitely.
And I want to actually, and I'm going to take it a step further. I mean, from a board standpoint, at least by our May and possibly June regular meeting, I would like for our supervisor who's over the gifted program to come before the board and to give a presentation to us as to what's the status of our current program, what's the game plan with our current program. And I want to have us as a board, because I think there's very valid concerns that have been raised by board members. I want us to have an opportunity to have that discussion and see what our game plan is. And then if we believe that there's some additional things that need to be done, maybe then we got more information and we're hearing from our supervisor as to this is what needs to be done. And we can do that in a coordinated type fashion and a logical type fashion. So,
Which board meeting, May or June?
well, let me hear from members. You want to do that in May? Sure. Is that good? To get a presentation from the supervisor. May, okay? Okay, let's go ahead and do it in May,
Okay. Mr. Gaines?
while it's still top of mind.
All right, duly noted. We'll have it on the agenda for May.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lassiter.
And I just want to make sure that the comment wasn't misunderstood. I didn't tell them that I wanted a program. I didn't tell them what to do with their money. I didn't tell them how to do their job. I'm saying as a board, I think that we should allocate money towards the gifted program to allow the people that do that as professionals to beef up. I'm not talking about revamping everything. I'm telling you, these people can use stuff
Adding more
tomorrow.
resources to the gifted program
Yes.
is what you're talking about doing.
So I'm, and I don't know today, I don't know what the status is teacher-wise.
I don't either.
But, I don't know if we're missing I have no idea. But I can guarantee you, without even looking at the program, that the program needs a lot of help.
Okay.
And so what I'm saying is, as a board, I would like to see us take some money on the surplus side and allocate that back so that the students can, that the people that are servicing the students right now have more hands-on things or whatever that they can do, with the students. That is my goal for the next school year. And then, after that, like you said, then yes, it's up to you.
Bless you.
It's up to you and the staff to come up and say, all right, here's our plan for the service. So just want to make sure that I get that clarified.
No problem, Mr. Lassiter, and certainly we're going to be opening up for motions in a moment. And so if you want to make that motion to reallocate those funds, we can certainly do that. I guess I will tell you from my own personal standpoint, I go back to what I was discussing earlier. I kind of like changing we've kind of flipped the paradigm a little bit. Where now we have the plan in place and then we fund it. And so I want, in some ways, I would be reluctant to just say, okay, here's additional funding without that plan. And so what my thought process is maybe if we hear from the supervisor, if there needs to be some things addressed, then maybe at that time, we may look at that again. But to have a plan in place as to what that is, rather than just saying, here's some extra money that you did not ask for. And that seems to be maybe one of the critical problems, is that if there's not a recognition of the need, sometimes just recognizing the need is you're 90% there of addressing the problem. So, but anyway, so let's go ahead and finish up the review of the GP expenditures. If anybody wants to ask Dr. Berkins any questions about those particular line items, I'm going to open the floor. Mr. Lassiter.
Well, of course, one of the other big hitters would be Office of the Principal. And not everyone, but from there down, you've got some big hitters in there that I'm just curious where, especially when we start getting in 164,000, 238,000 increase. And I think I assume I know where that one came from, but I know we also have parts in the keys that haven't been added to this yet that go towards that, so.
And Dr. Berkins, maybe you can on that particular line, let's see, what was that? Office of the Principal. You're actually, in the budget, the GP budget that you've developed, it'd actually be a decrease of $164,000 in that line, in that fund.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us, how did you come up with that? How did you
The
come up
same
with the
process
reduction?
as we did with everything else. We brought all of the budgets together and we added them up. And there wasn't one, this includes all of the schools. So we have 22 schools here, plus some items from Scott's office. And it wasn't a process where one person knew what the other one had, or one person knew what the other one didn't have. It was just, we brought all of this information together, and that's how it came out. It wasn't like, we just took 164,000 from them. We just gave them these figures, and when we brought it all together, that's how it ended up.
And going on to like one of the other big budget items, there's an increase of 451,000 under the maintenance of plant item. Mr. Braden, what are you doing over there? Where's this $451,000 increase coming from?
Actually, I submitted the maintenance budget with the areas that we needed to maintain where we're at. I'm not sure what that increase would show. I explained to you the points we went key, so I submitted to Dr. Perkins in spreadsheets. The amount that I showed without the amount shown in the keys did not show that, so I don't know that I can answer that question.
All right, so Dr. Perkins,
Let me go back to the workbook, okay?
okay.
Dave, real quick,
Mr. Moore.
if I can go back to that one, I'm assuming from the
Is that
principal,
operations? Are we
from the
looking at
principal line,
operations?
we had a lot of turnover in principals. I'm assuming a lot of that, there's some attrition, there's some change in pay scales that probably attributed to that.
A lot of it, when we looked at, like Dr. Perkins said, when we looked at the budget together, there were things that in the past were counted, things that we bought as a district that are counted under the office of the principal.
Okay.
So some of those things, we made an effort to move it over under my department, where I generally are in charge of all of those purchase orders that we do for the district. So some of that is just a matter of we accounted for it in a different area, because in the past, it's been bought out of the principal's line, and the principals, when they saw the office of the principal line, they saw those accounted and said, oh, I have this much money for Ainsworth. Well, we buy Ainsworth as a district to get the district reduction, or we buy, for example, IA as a district to get a lower cost. So one of the things we talked about was trying to move those for accounting purposes into Office of Instruction Support under where I see it, and where the principals don't see that, and then they don't get confused about I have that money.
Okay, so you're saying there's
Some of it's just that
quite a few
reduction there.
smaller changes. There's no
Yes,
real
sir.
big chunk that was an adjustment.
No,
there.
sir.
Okay.
I'm trying to look on the operations.
I'm looking at it right now.
So like MRO building, that kind of thing, that's 266, 330. Is that right? It'd be 72,620 335.
72,620 is maintenance, that's not
Maintenance.
operations. Operations is 72,610. Which one are we looking at? I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, we're looking at the one that has the increase under 72,620.
Oh, 72,620, that'd be maintenance, I'm sorry. I was looking at operations. 72,620. The,
Go to the right.
yeah, when I submitted the stuff to her, I put the stuff that we asked for in the maintain. I would not have an opportunity to submit anything on salaries or positions, so there are no new positions that I know, but the amounts that I showed you in the keys, I listed those in the budget, so I don't know if she included those in the budget or not. But I didn't just submit this year's, that is not just this year's budget, that is a budget based on what I projected we would spend. So I didn't just say, here's what we spent this year, we're gonna budget that again next year. I went through each line item and said, here's what we would do, and I'll go back and pull that up real quickly. So there may be some duplication from the keys, because it might have been my misunderstanding, because I put it all as maintain. So to me, maintain meant that's what we needed to operate the budget this year. So I didn't, and I wasn't a part of actually I was on the road and we were talking by phone when they pulled the stuff from the maintain to the orange column. So I'm not sure how I got pulled from the maintain to the orange
Did we
column.
find free money?
Yeah, I
That's where
don't
that's where it's coming from, that additional 479 minus some
And,
stuff.
and let me just say too, that the very first worksheet like this that we had, when I went through mine, there were it didn't have formulas in it. So the numbers, and this one, I'm looking through this one and I'm seeing formulas in this one. So it looks, I went through, I went 3/4 of the way through the first one, putting formulas in and doing them, making it do
sorry.
the math. And then you guys sent out an email saying, oh, well, we updated it, so I kind of just quit looking at it. And, but that's good, because if this one has formulas in it, which so far it appears to, and that's where we're actually seeing the changes. So the big hitter for this one does look like
What's the account number? And I can look at it specifically.
72,620, 335. And it provides for maintenance, repair of district buildings. And
What I've got, I can tell you exactly how I came up with the number. It's 296,333. 35,000 is for our water loop treatment, which is in this year's budget. $44,013 is for chiller maintenance from Train, which is not in this year's budget. That would be a new something we added. Building automation, controls and maintenance is not in this year's budget, $40,320. $100,000 for contracted HVAC repair, $20,000 for other specialized repair needs, and $57,000 for HVAC filter maintenance. Now, that $57,000 has actually been in the operations budget, and I moved that from 72,610, 399 into this category. So I swapped them. So 72,610, 399. I moved that amount over. So that's how, now, some of those items might have got listed in the keys, because some of those are new and some of those are not, but I thought what I needed to give was the total amount that was needed to be budgeted for that category. And so there may be some duplication. Because I was told to give this to each line item to Dr. Perkins, and that's what I did. That's how much we would put in that line item.
All right, so we got to get this straightened out. Dr. Perkins, Dr. Marzak. So under both those lines, 72,610 and 72,620, if you combine those increases in what's in Dr. Perkins, that's about $680,000.
But all of that amount of money is not new to the budget. Some of it is like insurance. I increased insurance 5%.
But that's not 700 and...
Right. I increased the utilities by 3% per year, which is what our agreement with Train. What we do is I increased them 3% per year and then took off the amount that Train is guaranteed savings. So I did that this past year. That's what we did out of the budget. So there was an increase in utilities. But I did include in each budget line item the amount that would be budgeted for that line item. So maybe, but we didn't sit down and go through those, so I'm not sure how that was translated in. Because what you see on your spreadsheet's now not how I was asked to give it. I was asked to give a individual tab with each budget line item, and I gave specific things that we would budget under those. I didn't just put a number. Yeah, that number right there. So that's what I gave her. I was just looking around. Yeah, so each one of those tabs, I gave an amount. And those are what we would budget it under there. Under that 72,623, 36, we would do playground mulch and maintenance, $50,000, elevator maintenance and repairs, $10,000, fire alarm system suppression equipment maintenance and repairs, $10,000, other equipment. Now, I didn't,
Now, let me ask you, Mr. Reed, so those, what we're looking at right there, are any of those items on the key request?
Yes.
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 So you're saying then that potentially some of these, Dr. Perkins, has some of the key requests in there?
That's the only one that I've seen, is playground mulch and maintenance.
when I look, now not that page, when I look in the workbook that we have, taking, and I didn't check the formula, going over to the far right-hand column, the total over there for the budget is $1,787,000 and some change. And when I look on the worksheet that we're working off of, I'm seeing $1,884,000 and change.
If you go to the keys on that tab, you'll see what I put in the keys.
Is it your total?
Yeah. So what I tried to put, what I did.
Scroll down.
And again, maybe I misunderstood the process. I put there are things that are in the keys that are listed under each line item because they're new. And I thought if they were new in that line item, they went into the keys and they're in the maintain order. But the only thing that are in the keys that are not in the line items are positions, because I wasn't given a line item for salaries. I wasn't given an opportunity to budget salaries. So this is what I was asked to turn in. And so I listed in each line item everything I thought we needed, and then if it was new, I put it over here under main.
All right, so I just need to know,
So I'm not sure, but
Okay.
from that point, I turned it in, and I'm not sure what happened to it.
all right, so I just need to know bottom line. Dr. Berkins and Dr. Marzak, are some of these on this GP budget that I'm looking at, do some of those numbers have some of the keys in there?
Yes. As we go back through, if you go back through each tab, you can see where there are some of the keys in there,
All right, because
So we need to go back and take those out.
right?
now,
I only saw one.
The
That was-
vehicles,
well, I'll just tell you,
right there.
I mean, if that's the case, I'm uncomfortable even going any further in this discussion until we've separated that out. Because I can't, here I've operated under the understanding for several days now that none of those items were in the key, none of the keys items were in. And so what I'm going to do is ask us to adjourn until tomorrow, and let's go through this spreadsheet one last time with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that there are none of those key requests in this beginning budget. Can we do that and
Yes.
have that
Yes.
for us to look
Yes.
at tomorrow?
Yes.
Motion that we fund gifted out of maintenance of plant.
All right, there's a motion on the table. Oh, okay. All right, so with that, I've got to have accurate,
I didn't see the one that.
yes,
Funded.
Mr. Dudley.
Now, what is finding the duplications in the maintenance, are you referring to all
That was the ask for,
departments to make sure that we don't have?
not until we funded them.
Yes, Dr. Berkins and Dr. Marzak, as Mr. Dudley pointed out, I want a fine-tooth comb of the entire expenditure of this beginning GP budget, and I want assurances at the next meeting that there's nothing in here that is in the key request, because otherwise we're potentially duplicating
That's true.
funding.
Yep,
And
you're
that-
right.
That affects
Yes, sir.
that bottom line tremendously in what we're trying to grapple with to try to figure out what do we need for extra funding. So,
Yes.
so that's my request, is that we go through this one last time. Let's get it accurate, get it to the board members first thing in the morning, or as early as possible in the morning, and let's come back and look at this again tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay? Mr. Moore?
Yeah, to follow up with that, as soon as we get that, can we just make sure we all get some kind of document of this? Because I know I didn't get a more recent version. And also, while we're talking about this, I'm going to say this again, the train M&V CEM agreement, the 44,250, I think that's one of the ones that's in two places right now. Regardless, I don't know if I need to make a motion or what, I think we have to fund that to keep our warranty that we've got with trains. So if I need to make a motion to move that over now, if I'm understanding that correctly, is that correct?
That will have to happen for them to guarantee the savings. If that's not in place, the savings are not guaranteed.
And that's by
But
June,
now, that's
correct?
not in our current fiscal year budget?
It is not,
Is this the
because
first
their
year
contract
company?
begins July 1st on the performance contract. We're in the installation period,
Okay.
so the guarantees begin
Well,
when they
I mean, there's nothing we
finish the
can do
installation.
officially tonight because we're in committee. And so, I
Yeah.
mean, as far as that goes, we'll need to do that.
Sure it is.
At our
He
April.
just make sure which document you put that number in.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll take care of it. We'll have it ready in the morning. First
Okay.
thing.
Okay. All right. And so we'll come back tomorrow at 6 o'clock then. Okay. All right. So is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Dudley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Moore. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.